Eschatology refers to the study of last things. I think we get that from the combination of two Greek words, logos and eschaton, I'm pretty sure. Specifically, this has to do with the end times, or the final destiny of humanity and the ultimate state of the universe. Now, according to the Bible and according to church history, there really are three main viewpoints of eschatology. These are the ones that most often get brought up when discussing eschatology among other Christians. And so this is going to be a brief introduction, but still lengthy. This will give you uh, just enough of a grasp on the language or terminology that is used when discussing these kinds of things, eschatology and the study of last things or end times. So the first one we're going to come to here is called amillennialism. This is a Christian eschatological viewpoint that interprets the 1,000 years mentioned in Revelation chapter 20 as a symbolic representation of the current church age, not a literal future earthly reign of Christ, which some other uh, eschatological viewpoints believe, and we'll get to those. It's the belief that Christ is currently reigning in heaven through the church. Some amillennialists believe that Christ is reigning in the hearts of believers only. This is a one viewpoint of amillennialism. And then others believe that Christ is reigning in the heavens. And some believe both of that, which would be my position. It's the belief that Christ is currently reigning in heaven and also in the hearts of believers through the church, and that his final return will mark the end of the church age and the beginning of the eternal state. And we'll talk more about the eternal state later. Here's a more detailed breakdown. The symbolic millennium. Millennialists view the 1,000 years in Revelation chapter 20 as a symbolic period, not a literal 1,000 year reign on the earth. And it's worth mentioning that when you look up many of the Bible verses in the Bible that mention 1,000 years, for example, the Bible says that God owns a cattle or the cattle on 1,000 hills. Well, does God just own the cattle on only 1,000 hills, or does he own all the cattle on all of the hills? So the 1,000 year period mentioned in the book of Revelation chapter 20 to the amillennialist is a symbolic uh, number of years that does not represent just a literal 1,000 years. We see it, or they see it, as a description of the present church age, which began at Christ's resurrection and continues until his return. The present reign. Amillennialists believe that Christ is already reigning in heaven, having ascended after his resurrection, and that his spiritual influence is present in the lives of the believers, as we mentioned before. No future golden age. Unlike premillennialism and postmillennialism, amillennialism does not posit a literal future earthly reign of Christ or a progressive improvement upon the world leading up to his return. But I will say we do believe in a new heavens and a new earth. So there is a future golden age, but it is not a half golden age as some other eschatological viewpoints will posit. It is the end of all end things. It is the final destination of all believers, which the book of Revelation, chapter 21 and 22, talks about in description. That is the new heavens and the new earth. Now, the final judgment, according to amillennialism, they believe Christ will return at the end of the church age for the final judgment, not before or after a millennial reign on earth. The already not yet. So, amillennialists believe in a paradigm, if you will, that emphasizes the already not yet tension, meaning Christ's reign is both inaugurated and not yet fully consummated. When Christ was crucified, buried, and resurrected, and when he poured out his Spirit upon all believers, then the kingdom of God, the his reign as the king in the kingdom was inaugurated. It's not fully yet come, but it will fully come at his second coming. So we already believe the kingdom is among us, in us, with us, but it has not yet fully been um, consummated or brought into fulfillment yet. Historical Protestant view, amillennialism is often considered the historic understanding of the millennium within Protestant theology. It has been the most dominant form of understanding from the days of St. Augustine all the way up until really the 1800s when John Nelson Darby began propagating the viewpoint of pre-tribulational premillennialism, which we'll get to that one. Premillennialism, and there's uh, really a couple different forms of premillennialism. There's historic premillennialism, and then the one I just mentioned, the pre-tribulational premillennialism, which is probably the most popular form of premillennialism today. Premillennialism is a Christian eschatological view that believes Jesus Christ will physically return to earth at the second coming. That's the second coming before the millennium, a literal 1,000-year period of peace and prosperity on earth. This view is based on a literal interpretation of Revelation 20, which describes Jesus' reign during this period. And here's a more detailed breakdown of that one. The literal second coming. Premillennialists believe in a physical and visible return of Jesus to earth. It's worth mentioning amillennialists do believe that as well. They just believe after the physical and visible return of Jesus to earth, there is no 1,000-year reign. Something I didn't mention when we were talking about amillennialism was that we do believe in a being caught up together or a quote-unquote rapture. We just also believe that after this second coming and visible return of Christ and his saints being caught up together with him, that we return to the earth, not necessarily go off to heaven for a period of years, then to come back after his second coming. So preceding the millennium, they believe this return will occur before the beginning of the 1,000-year reign of Christ, the millennium. The literal 1,000 years, the millennium is understood as a literal period of time, not a symbolic representation and future event. The second coming and the millennium are future events, not something that has already happened or is currently happening. Variations within premillennialism. Historic premillennialism, as we mentioned earlier, this view sees the church as a part of the same historical timeline as the Old Testament and believes the prophecies concerning the end times provide a symbolic history of the church, period. Dispensational premillennialism. This view distinguishes between the church and Israel, believing the church will be raptured before the Great Tribulation, the Great Tribulation being 7 years, which is the fulfillment of the 70th week of Daniel. And this is, we don't need to get in too deep into all of those details. There's a lot. Again, this is just a introductory video to these viewpoints. So the Great Tribulation, which precedes the millennium, pre-tribulational versus mid-tribulational. In the premillennial understanding, there's a rapture that is pre-tribulational. It means before the Great Tribulation. And there's some that believe the rapture will be in the middle of the Great Tribulation. These are subtypes of dispensational premillennialism that differ in what they believe the rapture of believers, or when they believe the rapture of believers will occur, before or during a Great Tribulation. In contrast to other millennial views, you have postmillennialism, which believes the second coming will occur after the long period of peace and prosperity on earth, the millennium. Of course, we haven't talked about postmillennialism. We will. And amillennialists believe the millennium is a symbolic period of time, not a literal 1,000-year reign of Christ, often identifying it with current church in a messianic age. Now, amillennialists are typically dubbed as post-tribulationalists. We believe the return of Christ will be after the tribulation, which some amillennialists believe that the tribulation period is happening all throughout the church age, from the ascension of Christ to the second coming of Christ, and some believe there will be an intensification, a great tribulation towards the end, and so that's just between different. You see, within amillennialism, premillennialism, and postmillennialism, there are many different viewpoints, different nuances between different camps within these particular viewpoints. In essence, premillennialism purposes that Jesus will return to earth, establish a literal 1,000-year reign, and then usher in the final judgment and then the eternal state. And the eternal state, again, is the new heavens and the new earth. Okay, postmillennialism. Postmillennialism is a Christian eschatological view that believes the second coming of Christ will occur after a period of peace, prosperity, and Christian dominance on the earth, often referred to as the millennium or 1,000 years. It differs from premillennialism, which believes Christ returns before the millennium, and amillennialism, which doesn't believe in literal millennium. Postmillennialists believe the church is actively involved in bringing about this golden age through evangelism and the spread of the gospel. And again, it's worth noting that premillennialists and amillennialists, just like postmillennialists, do believe that evangelism and the spread of the gospel is the commission of all believers. And so there is a bit of optimism in all three of these camps, but postmillennialists typically are dubbed as the most optimistic eschatological viewpoint because they believe that the gospel and the evangelism and spread of the gospel will result in basically Christianity somewhat taking over the world and kind of ushering in this golden age before Christ returns. Whereas the premillennialists and amillennialists, typically speaking, believe that the world is not going to become a golden age, but it's going to get worse before the return of Christ. Key beliefs of postmillennialism are the church's role. The church is responsible for spreading the gospel and influencing the world, ultimately leading to a Christianized society. Again, amillennialists and premillennialists believe that we are to spread the gospel and influence the world. We just don't believe it's going to make the whole world a golden age. The millennium, a period of peace and prosperity where Christian values dominate society, is expected before Christ's return. Second coming, Christ will return at the end of the millennium after the world has been Christianized. Optimistic view, as we discussed earlier, postmillennialism generally presents a more optimistic view of the future compared to premillennialism and amillennialism. And it's worth noting here that during the Great Awakening and the Great Awakenings, like during John Wesley's day and during Jonathan Edwards' day, they were postmillennialists. Of course, they were seeing many thousands and thousands of people coming to Christ because of the revivals going on during their day. So you could see how they were optimistic about the gospel taking over the world. Our day, where we see atheism, New Ageism, and a whole lot of different, we were really seeing a decline in interest in Christianity in our day. And so it's a lot harder for people to be post-millennialists in this day. But although there is a rising in amount and there is a number of Christians today taking the post-millennialist viewpoint. So gradual transformation, the transformation of the world into a Christianized society, is believed to be a gradual process, not an instantaneous event. Emphasis on the gospel. Postmillennialists emphasize the power of the gospel to change hearts and transform society. Contrasted with eschatological views, premillennialists believe Christ returns before the millennium. Amillennialists believe that the millennium is a symbolic period, not a literal 1,000-year reign of Christ on earth. The historical and theological context. The historical significance of postmillennialism was a dominant view among American Protestants in the 19th century, as I talked about earlier with Jonathan Edwards, and then earlier than that with John Wesley. The theological debate. Postmillennialism has been the subject of debate and criticism, with some questioning its optimistic view of the future and its emphasis on the church's ability to bring about a golden age, considering the pessimistic view of the future found in the New Testament. In summary, postmillennialism is a Christian perspective on the end times that emphasizes the progressive spread of the gospel, the potential for a Christianized world, and Christ's second coming after a period of peace and prosperity known as the millennium. And so that's the end of this video on eschatology. I will do another video involving the four main philosophical lenses by which Christians use to view the book of Revelation and really prophecy in general, um, and really other New Testament passages such as the Olivet Discourse. And so if you're interested in that, I will have that uploaded very shortly.